A very good day. Welcome all to our special Wall Street Blockchain Alliance webinar, Blockchain Technology, New Finance, and the Race to Innovate or Be Replaced, presented by our friends at WSBA corporate member Algorand with their friends and colleagues from Circle, Blockstack, and Republic. Before we start, a bit of housekeeping for today's presentation. This webinar is being recorded. All attendees will be in listen-only mode. We will reserve time at the end of the presentation for audience Q&A. Please submit your questions directly to the host via the Zoom chat. And now we will turn over to the moderator of today's webinar, Mr. Barry Finkelstein. Barry, over to you.
Ron, thank you. Good morning, everyone, afternoon, evening, depending on where we're coming into contact with you all. My name is Barry Finkelstein, and I will be acting as the host and the moderator for today's webinar. I've recently become a member of the Algorand team and very pleased to be part of that. In speaking for Algorand, myself and the broader WSBA family, appreciate all of you joining us, and we look forward to exploring the state of blockchain and how it's being utilized and where its impact is likely to take us in the near midterm future. To begin, I'd like to walk you through the current situation in the industry and address some challenges that are facing us and how they will have an impact. During today's webinar, we'll also give you a snapshot of who Algorand is and what we're doing with some of our valued partners to combat the challenges and to advance blockchain technology more generally. Hey, look, it's no secret that in today's rapidly changing world, customers' choices and their expectations are growing at an exponential pace. The growth is driving institutions, financial and beyond, to rethink their existing structure and force many to innovate or be left behind. There's a systemic shift in the way entities look to fundraise, trade, attract loans, and just generally speaking, access credit, all in an effort to bypass today's slow, expensive, and inefficient systems. Additionally, the growing increase in conversation around cross-border payments and the need to provide banking to the unbanked has furthered the demand to harness scalable and secure technologies. The doors have blown open for blockchain and DLT protocols, and new technologies have come bursting through with rapid developments in an attempt to meet these needs, providing platforms that remove the middlemen, lower costs, and expedite transactions, and make some existing protocols, for instance, like SWIFT, potentially vestigial. Here's an interesting stat to think about. According to a recent Loughborough University study, moving securities to blockchain could save $17 to $24 billion per year in global trade processing costs. Look, regardless of your enterprise focus or size, that's a significant number to think about. Properly designed blockchain protocols can allow for efficient and economic value transfer, regardless of asset type, among both individual and institutional lenders, borrowers, and merchants, along with numerous other financial applications. At Algorand, we've built a technology specifically to eliminate the friction in finance and more generally create a frictionless exchange of value where we take on an agnostic view towards asset type. The Algorand technology is specifically designed to help bridge the gap for the traditional financial world through the adoption of many new innovations. Most of you, hopefully, are aware that Algorand recently released its version 2.0 in November of last year, and with that, the ability to create layer 1 standard assets, smart contracts, and true atomic swaps. Not surprisingly, the result we've seen is a proliferation of use cases quickly migrating to the Algorand blockchain protocol due to the functionality and the ease of the execution. These advancements, along with the development of co-chain interoperability for permission and permissionless protocols, as well as the unfortunate occurrence of COVID-19, have accelerated the use and discussion of blockchain and digital asset technologies. The narrative around blockchain has completely shifted from what is it to how can we use it. The world as we know it is drastically changing for consumers, and financial institutions must keep up or morph to accommodate these changes. That's where we see Algorand's blockchain technology converging into existing systems to help ease that transition by providing a manageable technology as the race to innovate or be replaced gets tougher. I just finished reading an article earlier this week in which PayPal's Sri Shivanda said, "The digitization of currency is only a matter of when, not if." We're not going to be able to cover every topic in just this 1 hour, but I'm excited to tell you that we will be joined today by esteemed MIT professor and Turing Godel Prize and RSA Prize winner Silvio Micali, whose groundbreaking work in zero-knowledge proofs and other mathematical and cryptographical theorems has laid the foundation for today's modern cryptography that many of the blockchain protocols are built upon. As founder of Algorand, Silvio is constantly pushing the implementation of blockchain technology to work towards a borderless economy. And today, he's going to be discussing the need for public and private blockchain infrastructures. Following Silvio's conversation, we'll be joined by Algorand's own CEO, Steve Kokinas, and Munib Ali, who's CEO and founder of Blockstack, a decentralized computing network with 375 apps built on top of it. They'll be discussing interoperability and technology for a maturing industry. But to kick things off, we've got Joao Regnato, the head of product at Circle, Andrew Durgee, head of crypto and tokenization at Republic, and our own David Markley from Algorand's business solutions team, who will give us a preview of where we are and where we're going in blockchain space. So with all that said, let's get started and open it up to Joao, Andrew, and David. Welcome, everybody.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
So guys, thanks for being here, of course. And blockchain has just exploded over the last 12 months at such a rapid pace. And each of your projects have, as recently as this morning, made some significant announcements. So let's use that as a springboard to discuss where we are today and where you see us heading. So Joao, if I could turn to you first, perhaps, can you give us some facts regarding the growth and the usage of USDC and stablecoins more generally, and keeping with that growth, what are you seeing in the adoption of offerings at all that are out there, and how stablecoin is necessary for that to proliferate?
For sure, and I'll start by saying that I'm happy to that we are announcing collaboration with the Algorand Foundation as of this morning to bring digital dollars in the form of the USDC to the Algorand blockchain. Is something that we have been working on conceiving for a long time, and it has to do with the growth that you mentioned, and we're happy to be starting that journey today and hopefully bring that to the industry later in Q3. But in terms of a backdrop for even that announcement and what's happening in the industry, we have formed what is called the Center Consortium, which is an organization that governs a set of standards and protocols for interoperable digital currency, and particularly in the way that we have conceived fiat collateralized digital currency that runs on public blockchains. This is something that we have launched in 2018, but it was something that was in the works, or at least part of our vision, for a long time. I mean, Circle has been in the industry since 2013, trying to bring blockchain technology to financial services and consumers in general, and we were very stubborn about the vision that, you know, money just has to work on the internet just as any other data type works on the internet, such as media and communications. And we have to be able to bring that innovation that the internet brought to you know, hundreds of millions of consumers when it comes to financial services as well. I mean, the technology is there. We just need to find the means for that. So we were always passionate about that vision, but obviously flexible in terms of how we achieve that. Eventually, I think we navigated towards the concept of fiat collateralized stablecoins, but we thought that the industry still didn't have the right solution so that, you know, thousands of businesses could build on top of that as any other piece of infrastructure, like a database or an application server. And our vision for that solution is one that is, you know, multi-issuer, so it doesn't depend on a single company. It's multi-currency. It has to obviously speak to the currency concepts that people and consumers are familiar with on a day-to-day basis. And we think it has to work as a protocol. So it has to be interoperable. And in our case, since we talk about blockchains, it has to be multi-chain. So we're very excited to be announcing today that USDC will soon be interoperable with a couple of blockchains. In terms of demand, what we are seeing, and this is also what accelerated the collaboration, since we have launched Circle Platform Services sort of at the beginning of the year, and those services really allow for business customers of ours to really build a lot more infrastructure on top of USDC. We just have witnessed an explosion of demand. I mean, USDC in and itself has grown pretty much 100% in terms of circulating supply It was hovering at around $450 million in market cap at around March timeframe, already coming from a strong growth at the beginning of the year, and now it sits at just under $1 billion. We have seen for the first time, it's something that we always expected, but really in 2020 we can see that for the first time we're seeing the shoots of interest in a very, very broad set of use cases. So it has certainly broken from the crypto exchange and trading use case into commerce, into financial applications, and into payments and cross-border payments, business-to-business settlements, gaming. We are seeing all of that demand, and in particular, there is also a demand for compliant and scalable blockchain solutions, and that's also part of our interest in making sure that we can collaborate with solutions such as Algorand.
So when we think about stablecoins in general, it starts to bring a homogeneity to the blockchain space. And then I think, Andrew, about Republic and what you're doing with your innovations in terms of being able to give different platforms for issuance, which is attracting an audience that hadn't previously been able to operate in a lot of the different types of financial securities that are out there. And I'm wondering if you can kind of build off of that conversation around homogeneity and all, and how Republic has innovated in the space and how it's changed just over the last 12 months and what you're seeing as the future over the next 6 to 18 months.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, thanks for having us on here. Always happy to be involved with anything Algorand related. Be part of that Algorand family. Well, we're going to be having a big announcement here in the next 5 minutes or so on Bloomberg, announcing our partnership and a launch of our new security token framework on the Algorand network. The Algorand 2.0 or ASA framework is what allows us to build out and tokenize security tokens within the U.S., meeting all the jurisdictional needs from transfer authorities, clawback, whitelisting, mint, burn, everything required within the United States and a number of other large jurisdictions in order to be able to launch a framework of this nature. It was developed in parallel with SEC and FINRA, and we anticipate this will be the new standard and framework going forward within the US. So super excited not only be able to bring that product to market and to both retail investors and accredited investors, but also to be able to have that framework to be easily leveraged into other tokenization projects that may be looking to tokenize securities or future earnings, revenues. And we really believe that's the overall direction we're going to see in the industry. The security tokens really lagged behind a lot of what we saw elsewhere, mainly because they just didn't have the feature sets necessary in order to be able to operate, particularly within the United States. And it really wasn't until the Algorand 2.0 launch that was really solved. And that really got us heavily interested as we started to move into that direction. I think as far as the space goes as a whole, we're starting to move away from the innovation side. We're starting to see the commoditization of a lot of this technology. And that being said, now we're much more into the implementation or disbursement of this tech stack. So I think some of the more successful projects that you'll see coming out that are being built on these frameworks in particular, built on Algorand, will often hide the blockchain layer as a whole. If you look at most of the successful tech outside of blockchain over the past 25 years in the computer space, most of that is hidden, whether that's TCP/IP protocols or like deep Apache layers. An example I always like to use is Salesforce. Most people are very familiar with Salesforce, but most people don't know that that's built on a very messy layer of Apache. Nobody cares because they're able to log in, use the technology, it serves all their purposes, it has the feature sets available. So I think as we start to see these enterprise chains continue to roll out, and Algorand being at the top of that list, you may not necessarily know that's built on that framework or built on that blockchain, because that will be overall hidden from the user base. So I think that's going to be the real key overall to adoption success, regardless if that's a public or private chain itself. I think that inevitably that's the direction that we're going. We're seeing that with the large enterprise projects at this point on a day-to-day basis. I
appreciate that, Andrew. And David, maybe you can comment on this next question, then we can ask both Joao and Andrew to give their viewpoints on it. There's a fear, let's use that term, of digital assets versus fiat currency. And I think it's more one of, as you say, Andrew, people not necessarily understanding it at this point. And so it's a matter of how do we help the broader universe get comfortable that there shouldn't be a fear for digital assets vis-a-vis fiat currency. David, maybe you could give some thoughts on that, and then we can pass it over to Joao and Andrew as well.
Certainly. Yeah. So talking about reducing fear, I mean, we need to build products and foundational infrastructure that's resilient, proven, has a market cap close to $1 billion, has tokenized multiple different types of assets. Everything that, you know, this partner, this family, as Andrew called it, has been working on building out is, I think, what we need to make people feel more and more comfortable. And so, as Andrew mentioned, working closely with the regulators, making sure that you have those permissions built into the protocol so that if you need to freeze, go through whitelisting, have clawback permissions, you can do all of those things. And so it becomes very transferable. And now you can just take the advantage of the benefits of the speed and the security that comes with using a blockchain platform. And so, you know, I think that's the foundational piece. And we've been seeing a lot of interesting, you know, proof of concepts or kind of early starts over the last 4 or 5 years. But as Andrew alluded to, that we're really starting to, we're at a tipping point here where we're starting to see that transition from ideas where people are playing with the technology to having fully functional companies that really get you up the learning curve and abstract all of the complexity underneath, so that when you want to create a token, you have a nice UI using Andrew's new Republic, you know, platform. You have a nice UI where it's point and click. You can get in and out of those assets by using something like USDC supported by Circle. That is now portable. You can go across multiple different chains. When we hear a little bit more from Silvio, you'll understand how you might be able to move from a private to a public chain as well, and then take advantages of both of those network configurations. And then finally, for people that want to push the envelope, have some unique curated types of applications, they can work with our partners at Blockstack and have this new robust, much more approachable programming language to kind of push the envelope even further. And so I think, you know, as all of these stars are starting to align, and the convergence of all of this technology, I think we're starting to really reduce the fear, as you put it, in approaching blockchain technology. And the last thing that I'll add on, Barry, before we kick it over, is that's been at the core of what we've been doing here at Algorand. Is we've been really trying to reduce the barrier to entry and make sure people come up the learning curve as fast as possible. That's why we've got people that you can hop on the phone with instead of trying to go to some, you know, Reddit forum and get your technical questions answered by the community. And so, you know, we're pretty proud of the ability that we have to work with institutions, both like Circle and Republic, but also larger companies as well.
And Joao, you know, building off of that, specifically since USDC is a backed currency, can you discuss that a little bit? Because that certainly is at the top of a lot of people's conversation at this point.
Yeah, for sure. And by the way, I completely agree with what David said, and I think Andrew brought up an interesting point. It's very akin to how we see as well. I think we are definitely moving from the technology centric phase back to the user experience centric phase, and I think USDC in particular has a role to play as a bearer instrument, right? There's a lot of consumers, and there's a lot of value for having consumers, you know, directly hold on to USDC in various forms, and what they can achieve with that. But there's also a number of use cases and a number of companies that are going to be interested in hiding that behind the better user experience or a different user experience. And if you have an Airbnb or an Uber or any one of those apps in your mobile phone today, do you know how the dollar, any balance that you have on that app, do you know how that is represented? Do you know if it's stored in an Oracle database? Do you know if it's stored on a bank, or, you know, is it an indirect ledger? Like, people don't care about those things, and the user experience is the most important thing. But consumers are certainly going to care if all of a sudden they can transfer those funds much more cheaply and fastly to a number of other services. I think that's the focus in terms of how we think about USDC backing, and that has always been a primary concern for us. It has always been a part of the solution that we work together with regulators, because we knew this was key to make sure that this product was going to be a long-term piece of infrastructure that the industry could build on top of. I think there's a lot more in terms of education around what we need to do, in terms of how we can make people understand that the investment policy the center has for the backing of these assets, and how actually secure it is, how independent it is from an issuer like Circle in this case, how it is invested in very liquid funds that are actually probably more secure than FDIC insured bank accounts, how it's not susceptible to fractional reserve. We believe that's key for a solution like USCC, and I think it's complicated, as with a lot of other topics around stable coins. There's a lot of education that we still need to do, but we are confident that we have achieved a model in conjunction with regulators and banking partners that we work with that is really what the industry needs.
And Andrew, you mentioned it earlier, the work that you've done with regulators and the like, and we have a large members of contingency of the audience that are both lawyers, accountants, and the like, typically is involved with the WSBA, and so I'm sure they have some great interest in, really understanding from you just how you've managed to bridge those gaps and the adoptability that you're finding because of the steps that you've taken.
Yeah, we definitely took a different approach at Republic. We went straight to the regulators head on, straight to the Hill. A good chunk of our staff is actually attorneys, so that's both helpful and arduous at times. But making sure that those T's are crossed and those I's are dotted through that process, and using it as a vehicle to not only try to push what our inevitable agenda is, but to also educate the regulators themselves, because they're in a similar position as others who are new to the space. They don't understand it. They're trying to understand it. They realize that it's something significant, but it's not necessarily available for them to just pull that information and be able to digest it, right? So education of the regulators has been a really big spear tip of that overall process. And really the first thing you got to start with is trying to decouple the idea of speculative crypto assets from actually blockchain technology as a whole. I think over the past 3 years, a lot of those two got married, and the more that we can pull those apart so people understand, and a lot of people have done this through rebranding. You hear the word DLT for distributed ledger technology, and trying to move away from that idea of a crypto asset. So education has been at the forefront of that process, and working hand in hand with those regulators. The SEC is the #1 visitor to our website, which is both exciting and terrifying. But because of that, it's allowed us incredible flexibility and access in order to be able to produce this new framework that we're super excited about. So I think when people are looking at how to really operate within the US, what the right method is, I wouldn't necessarily shy away from operating in the US. I think they're very clear swimming lanes, actually much clearer than other areas, in particular Asia, to develop this technology. And if you work in parallel with those regulators, while it may take longer, at the end, you're going to have a product that's much more consumable, either from an enterprise client perspective or even potentially an end user, depending on what your position is.
Thanks, Andrew. And Joao and David, thank you for your insightful comments. You used the word education, Andrew, and couldn't agree more. And in fact, I'm going to use that word to transition us over to Silvio as the only MIT professor that I believe is on this call currently, so it's a good transition. But thank you, gentlemen, for being part of this. Stick around for the Q&A. I know there's quite a few questions have already come in, and hopefully we'll be able to learn even more during that session. So Ron, if you could switch us over to Silvio's piece now, that'd be wonderful.
Discuss Algorand's approach to coaching. Let me tell you, Algorand, we worked very hard as a team for many years, and we are very proud of our technology. And frankly, it's the best blockchain money can buy. But that said, very often a permissionless blockchain is not what the only thing that is needed. For regulatory problems or for other good and valuable consideration, you may want to have a private blockchain, permission. So no matter how good the permissionless Algorand protocol may be, you may not use it for regulatory reasons. But we believe that, however, there is always a space for Algorand, whether you are in the permissionless space or in the permission space. But what is more, we want to allow the seamless transition between permission and permissionless blockchain. We don't want that somehow some regulatory problems stand on the way to let you have the best blockchain you are entitled to have. So the subject of today's 10 minutes or 8 minutes remaining is the consensus protocol. Which consensus protocol does it run? Algorand, of course. Well, why Algorand? Well, for three very valuable reasons. Reason number one, scalability, security, and true distribution. You may say, well, gee, I'm a permission chain. How much scalability do I need? Maybe 10 verifiers will do. But don't you agree that in this day and age of attacks, cyber attacks, 100 verifiers are better? And in fact, aren't 1,000 better than 100? As long as you can be efficient, as you have a single centralized system, you should be able to welcome the ability to distribute your security over multiple servers. And this algorithm lets you do. Reason number two, layer one smart contracts. Let me remind you of what these layer one smart contracts are. In Algorand, they are smart contracts that are executed with the same security and speed of ordinary payments. So with 1 milli-algo, and in a few seconds, you can do things that are actually very slow, very expensive, and sometimes very shaky to do as a layer two smart contracts. One example of this is atomic swaps. You have an asset that I like, I have an asset that you like. Well, in a few seconds and 1 milli-algo later, we swap our assets. Bingo, done. Another application, you are a builder, you proudly build an office building. Now you want to tokenize it and then sell it at auction to really realize the value of what you've done. Is this complicated in algo? No, it's a layer one smart contract. That means in 1 milli-algo, in a few seconds, you have tokenized the entire building. And by the way, this extends to auctions, collateralized loans, or post and sale, all kinds of good stuff that you want to do. And finally, the third reason is interoperability. You want to be an Algorand co-chain to interoperate. With whom? First of all, you want to interoperate with the main permissionless chain. You go, really? Give me a reason why I should do so. Okay, here is a reason. Auctions. Assume you have an asset here, A, that you want to sell at an auction. You know, what is good about auction is that the more participants, the more bidders, the highest the price. So aren't you better off going to the main chain where everybody can participate and therefore sell the item at our auction and then repatriates the money, whether it be in stable US dollars, algos, or stable euros, or whatever, of course. So interoperability with the co-chain to the main chain is guaranteed by a super speed highways, all these arrows. These are 4 lanes, 8 lanes highway. No, you parachute your assets and you repatriate super fast any money you make. Well, what else you want to interoperate with? Well, other co-chain. Why? Because your co-chain, no matter how rich in assets it may be, it does not have all the assets in the world. Here, a blue chain has an asset A, and another red chain has an asset B, and they want to exchange it. How does this work? Well, you take the superhighway to parachute your assets to the main chain. Once the assets are on the main chain, you swap them in a few seconds at a 1 milli-algo by virtue of our legendary atomic swaps. And then after you swap them, you repatriate the assets where they wanted to be. Done. Okay, Silvio, I think I get it. So essentially, Algorand permissionless chain is a kind of a hub that allows permissioned version of Algorand, co-chains, to interact through the hub with everybody else. Yes, but I haven't seen this somewhere. Is this the only claim to be a hub? Not at all. As you can see, there are all kinds of other people who can be hubs, and they want to build or claim to build similar things. So let us ask a very fundamental questions. Are all hubs equal? And the answer is very clear, no. Let me give you an example in a familiar setting where the hub is an airline hub, okay? Look at two hubs. One gives you mechanics to service your planes. It gives you hangars to work on your planes. It gives you infrastructure in terms also of hotels for passengers in between a flight and the other to rest, have a meal and whatever. And on the other side, you say, well, I'm a hub too, and what I have to offer is a good view, perhaps not enough. In other words, my point that I want to make is that the hub is only as good as the support it can offer. And let me tell you, Algorand offers the best tech and is the best hub because of all the layer one tools and all the things that you find inside. You'll find a way to treat your assets as they deserve to be treated. So in closing, I think you are absolutely perfect. Thank you very much. I hope you enjoyed. That is interoperability you should demand and should demand no less than Algorand. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Silvio, from afar. I hope you guys all enjoyed our extensive graphics department. And perhaps a wonderful time to bring Steve Kokinos, our CEO, on, along with Munib Ali, CEO of Blockstack. Gentlemen, are you there? Just want to make sure.
Yeah, hi Barry. Hey Munib.
Hi, Munib. Hi, Steve.
Hey, everyone.
So we can all see the passion that Silvio has, and rightly so, for co-chains and interoperability more generally. It's certainly the hot term of the moment. Can't have a conversation without the word interoperability coming to the fore. And Algorand and Blockstack are working in collaboration is arguably a monumental moment for blockchain protocols and the multi-chain world that we live in now and as we look to the future. It'd be great if you guys could perhaps take the audience through how this collaboration came together and what you see the benefits for both your companies. Steve, perhaps start with you and then we'll move to Munib.
Yeah, sure. Well, I guess if just give a little bit of history. I mean, I think that we've known Munib for a while, and in fact, he's known Silvio for a long time, and we see them along with Algorand as a handful of projects that are very high quality and are really working to kind of move the ball forward on both sort of technical and business fronts. And on our side, we obviously have spent the past year or so focusing on layer one primitives within Algorand that were sort of a necessity. But as we started to look at how we improve developer experiences and what we might want in a more general purpose smart contract language, we quickly realized that the team at Blockstack and the Clarity language were very similar philosophically to the a lot of the concepts we had come up with on our own, and so it really made perfect sense to work together on it.
Yep, I'll just echo that. So I started working in the crypto industry somewhere in 2013, and for the longest time, one of the biggest things I would tell everybody is that I wish that more sophisticated teams and specifically computer scientists would enter the space, because I have a background in distributed systems, did my PhD at Princeton there. Interestingly, one of Silvio's colleagues, Ron Rivest, who is the R in the RSA, is my academic grandfather. And so I think that the ties go deep back to the same research community. And I was thrilled to see when Silvio kind of like decided to start working in this space, because there's amazing potential here. But the crypto industry was not started like how the internet got started through a DARPA grant and all of the top institutions and research labs kind of like working towards it. It comes from a different community, and I think it can benefit a lot from the more traditional computer scientists building scalable, secure protocols, because I think secure, scalable infrastructure can go a long, long way. And the same thing is what we're seeing with the Clarity language, right? Like if you look at the status quo in the industry right now, there's a JavaScript-like language that a lot of people are using for smart contracts, and it's leading to all these different hacks or people spending a lot of money in doing manual audits of code bases as well. Whereas with a language like Clarity that is decidable, meaning that it can give you mathematical proofs for what a program can and cannot do even before you execute it, you just upgrade the general level of security for the entire industry, but also people can save a lot of costs for these manual audits, and they can actually automate a lot of the auditing that needs to happen for these smart contracts, which are going to keep like assets worth hundreds of millions of dollars on it, right? So I think this code is very different from traditional websites. It's I think of that as more like code that runs on aircrafts, right? Like it cannot crash, it cannot malfunction, and that's the thing that we optimize for with the Clarity language.
Thanks, Muneeb. Steve, can you talk a little bit about, because it seems to me that it really is somewhat groundbreaking to have two major protocols like Blockstack and Algorand coming together to work collaboratively. Is this going to become a norm? Is this what we're going to see now moving forward? A bit of a consolidation of the smarter technologies, finding the best ways to move forward to answer some of the interoperability questioning?
Well, I hope so, and I think that you know, if you look at sort of previous kind of thematic tech waves, whether it's the internet or cloud computing, you know, there is no example where one technology alone, you know, powers an entire segment, and so I think it certainly is the case that developers are going to want to take advantage of different technologies. At this, you know, at the same time, I think one of the things that everyone needs to think about in blockchain is that, you know, there's a very small proportion of the world's developers that are building on, you know, platforms like Algorand or Blockstack today. And, you know, we look at not the, you know, hundreds of thousands that are, but the 20 million or so that aren't. And I think making those experiences very simple so that they can come in and simply get their work done is going to be very important. And the less work they have to do learning new languages, learning new details makes it easier for them to do that. And so I think that it represents a real advantage to platforms that do work together to kind of help enable that. And I think beyond that, it also sort of gives us time back to think about things like end user experiences and others. And I think if you look at mature markets, when you fire up Netflix, you don't know that they're using Amazon Web Services or other technologies. You just know that you're just watching your show. And I think that you know, like also Joao mentioned earlier, I think it's important that we start focusing on some of those things and bringing simplicity into the equation. So I think, you know, sort of taking a step forward here and enabling developers to leverage tools that best fit kind of their application and purpose is, you know, is very important, but certainly we hope is something that'll become the standard versus the exception as it is right now.
Yeah, Muneeb, your thoughts around the same question?
Yeah, I think this is a very interesting trend, and I'm very excited to be a part of it. So there are two things here. I think one is that some of my friends, they joke around that, hey, this is Muneeb, like he's actually running like 7 startups, right? And I think it's just a reality that if you are trying to build a crypto protocol right now, there's so many different things you need to do. Like if you look at Blockstack, we have an authentication system, we have a blockchain, we have a storage system, and all of those things are needed because we don't have clear choices available in the industry right now. But if you would ask anyone like me, I don't want to build like 7 different startups, right? I want to focus on certain areas, and I want to reuse as many things out there as possible. And I think programming language is a great example where, as Steve mentioned earlier, when we initially started talking to the Algorand researchers, our conversations were around design principles, right? Like forget about what the language looks like or what the syntax is. Like it was around design principles, that this is what is needed to solve the fundamental challenges here. And if there's alignment on the design principles, we would much rather collaborate and grow the pie rather than trying to create like our own kind of like small walled gardens, right? So that's one thing. The other thing is this idea of like interconnecting blockchains, or even like internet of blockchains, right? And I would say that there was a first generation of protocols in this general direction, and their general architecture was more like, yes, there can be an internet of blockchains. Everyone should just go through my blockchain, right? And it's a little bit of like, you know, it's a harder sell that the entire world kind of like moves over to your blockchain or your standard, and that's how we'll get an internet of blockchains. Whereas I think what Steve and I are talking about is more about direct interconnection, that and languages, like having same languages helps a little bit there, right? So there could be primitives in the blockchain itself where you can directly communicate to another blockchain. And by having the same language, I don't think the same language is required, but it definitely makes the job of the developer much easier. That I'm thinking of my program as part of this program is going to get published on the Algorand blockchain. Part of the program is going to get published on another blockchain like Stacks, and then they can intercommunicate. I think that's true interconnection. And this is how a picture for a next generation internet or a internet of blockchain starts to appear. And I do think that high quality projects would bubble to the top that way, right? Like if they're collaborating more and they start getting more traction in certain areas, like people are going to Algorand because they like certain features, and they're going to Stacks for certain different set of features. That's how I think a more clear picture would start emerging versus the current set of like, here are 20 different protocols and all of them are basically reinventing the wheel.
Thanks, Munib. And so I want to be sure I leave an appropriate amount of time for questions from the audience, but I have a question. It's a bit of an open-ended question here, and I know we don't have the exact answer to it, but I think the audience will be extremely interested in both of your opinions. Pretend you had a crystal ball, and you look into the crystal ball and you can see what the world of not only your own companies, but blockchain and DLT in particular and crypto looks like 12 months from now. What would you say you're seeing when you look into that crystal ball? Steve, I'll start with you.
Well, I think, you know, if I just take a step back, I think what we've started to see is, you know, a really interesting progression where, you know, people are working on a number of applications. I think we're seeing, if you look at, you know, what's historically been powered by kind of decentralized finance and sort of the crypto community, I think now we're seeing a lot more folks in traditional finance and payment networks really thinking about how to use these technologies. We're also seeing central banks and countries thinking about it. So I think the market as a whole has made, you know, a huge step forward in terms of, you know, the seriousness of the projects and, you know, the kinds of things that people are trying to build. And so I think we're going to see over the next year more projects launch. We're also going to see, I think, hopefully, you know, led by Algorand and Blockstack, you know, increasing sophistication in the tooling that people have, making it easier for them to deploy. But I think really, you know, we're excited not only to see how people are thinking about this, but I think now over the next year, we're going to start to see applications really launching. And, you know, some of the results of the work that people have been doing over the past couple of years, I think are going to definitely come to light.
Yeah, and Munib, I imagine you share some of the similar thoughts, but interested in your specific ideas.
Yeah, I absolutely do a plus one that, but I can give this interesting theory, more of a speculation, right? And because the data points are there are only two data points here, right? So, and those data points are that I entered the industry in 2013, and Bitcoin is obviously the protocol that a lot of people first get introduced to crypto through Bitcoin. And Bitcoin, like I view that as a reserve cryptocurrency, and it's here to stay, and so on. And sometimes Bitcoin is the trigger for more interest into the broader ecosystem. And 2012 is when Bitcoin halved, right? So the halving events that happens. And 2013 was like a mini bull market, and a lot more people got involved. And I'm actually a product of that. Like I got introduced in 2013 and through various reasons. And then it's a very cyclic market, right? So it goes through this like massive kind of like upward trend, and then massive volatility in the downward direction. And a lot of people kind of like exit, but the fundamentals remain true, right? Like there's a lot of innovation happening. If anything, companies get this little bit of a breathing room to really upgrade their infrastructure, like different work that they need to do to get ready for the next wave. And the next wave was when Bitcoin again halved in 2016, and 2017 was this crazy, like Wild West type of a year with so many new people getting introduced to crypto. And 2020 is when Bitcoin halved a third time. So my prediction for the next 12 months is a little bit like if the previous two data points are correct, 2021 might look similar to 2013 or 2017. But they take that with a grain of salt.
Okay, well, you know, to the extent that it looks a bit like 2017 and alternatives do the same, I'm sure many people on this call will be happy to see that kind of rise in value, no doubt. Ron, I want to be respectful of the time that we have left, and I believe there's quite a few questions that are out there. So should we open it up for questions and say thank you to Muneeb and Steve here and ask you guys to stick around for any of the questions at this point?
We do have questions coming in. Absolutely happy to start the Q&A with you, Barry, if you want to do that right now.
Yeah, that'd be wonderful. I just, before we get to the Q&A, in case we run out of time, I do want to say thank you to all of our guests, our partners, to Ron and the whole WSBA group. I hope that you're finding that there's just so much application going on and so much quick development and acceleration of the whole blockchain and DLT conversation now, and that this has been helpful to you all. So let's see what the questions have to say, and looking forward to it.
Absolutely, and thank you, Barry. So question number one that came in for the gentleman from Republic, and I'm quoting now, companies have been reluctant to issue security tokens. Which companies, and I suspect which demographics of companies do you believe will issue tokens on your platform and other platforms going forward, and how do you see that evolution of token issuance across different industries happening?
I think it's going to be really a windfall. Everyone is kind of waiting to see what that first look is going to be. Obviously, we're launching our security token July 15th, which we're super excited about. I think that's going to clear the path for a lot of other projects or a lot of other people of interest to move in that direction. I think ease of process is going to be a really big component of that. One of the things about security tokens that most people probably don't realize is the people that are interested in security tokens generally don't have a technology background. It's generally people much more from a business perspective or a business development or a finance perspective. So they generally come to us heavily questioning the technology component because they just don't understand it. So it's our responsibility to be able to not only educate them and get back to that education topic, but also make that process as turnkey and simple as possible. So when we developed our framework, a big component of that was making sure that that platform was easy to be leveraged for other projects of interest or companies looking to tokenize assets or securities without them having to be blockchain specialists, and being able to operate in that space and navigate that space in any other interface that they'd normally have used in the past. So it'd just be very similar to potentially an online banking solution rather than something that's extremely blockchain forward.
Great, thank you very much. Next question, can you share your thoughts, and this is collectively for all of the speakers. One of the challenges historically in technology has been the monetization of protocols, and we've seen that in the past with internet protocols, et cetera. How do you envision protocols being monetized in the future, and how does that evolve with the integration with other enterprise platforms, for example? And we open that up to any of the presenters.
Well, I guess why don't I can start. You know, I think one of the big differences between sort of the blockchain movement and, let's take the internet as another example, is, you know, in the internet for the underlying protocols, there was no way for the creators of those protocols to participate in the economic success of them. And I think one of the big differences in sort of the blockchain and crypto movement is that, you know, now there is a way to tie economics of a platform to, you know, the people who created it and to the people who are supporting those networks. And I think, you know, we've seen that through interest in not only, you know, original in Bitcoin through mining, but through, you know, a variety of different mechanisms that people have created. So I think it's very interesting, both from a computer science and a technology standpoint. But there's also sort of an interesting economic angle that I think is fundamentally different than we've seen in previous tech waves.
Yeah, and even if you take that a step further, I think there's a really large social implication along with that, Steve. So let's take Uber, for example. What if Uber drivers were able to have Uber equity or Uber stock from when they first started, right?
Sure.
And they have significant buy-in. They're going to be involved for a lifetime, perhaps. But no, they didn't have access, right? And that's the core concept of blockchain for me, and I've been in this now for 10 years, has been between community and access. And that's what really you're seeing with the deployment of these protocols, where people who want to get involved early, whether that's from a development side or an investor side, are able to have an access to this new value class, and then grow with the project over time. And I think you're going to start to see more and more of that start to proliferate more of your standard industries, especially whether you're looking at a Reg CF campaign or a Reg A Plus campaign, where retail investors are able to get involved much earlier and don't have that barrier of entry of accreditation. And same thing when you're working with developers who have access to bounty programs and incentive programs that allow them to build onto these platforms and then overall accelerate whatever that project is into the consumer's hands.
Great, thank you very much. Next question, and as Barry alluded to, we're very privileged at the Wall Street Blockchain Alliance to have obviously a lot of technologists and banks in the financial markets, as well as lawyers and accountants, and I suspect this question came from the legal side of the aisle, so to speak. Quote, for equity securities, how do you sell the idea or sell an issuer that it makes sense for them to issue tokenized securities? And I think it really goes to something that was discussed earlier that we often call here the education curve. Really bringing different industry segments to the point of understanding the benefits of playing in a blockchain platform and leveraging the capabilities of a block stack or a public, a Circle, or an Algorand. And that's for the entire panel.
I mean, I can hop back in here again. I think there's a couple questions you have to ask yourself when you're starting to look at tokenization, right? And this is something that first thing we always ask people when they come to us, they're like, oh, let's use blockchain, super buzzword, drive valuation. Well, the first question is, why do you need it? Why does this particular project or this asset or this platform, why do you need tokenization? And that's sometimes a harsh reality, because I would say a vast majority of the time we'll say, you probably don't need it. It's probably not the best path forward for you. But if it is, and we're able to identify a clear swimming lane for them that they can access the value of blockchain, and whether that's from borderless transactions or incredibly affordable transaction fees or disbursements or payments or tracking. One of the things about investing as a whole, and I'll use this example, if someone's looking to tokenize some asset and they want people to buy in from an investment perspective. One of the things about investing as a whole is it's a very low touch process. You invest in something, whatever X dollars you put into it, and then you don't think about it for a quarter or a year until you get some annual report, right? That's the traditional investment model that we've seen for 100 years or more. But with being able to tokenize the assets and being able to know who has those assets, where they are, how they're interacting with them, you have an entire new engagement mechanism that you can use to drive involvement from that particular investor, because now you're digitally connected with them at all times. So that changes the entire investment model from something that's a very low touch environment that may not drive more value other than just money to that particular project or effort, to now you can really drive involvement and engagement with the investors on a regular basis. And that's one of the huge fundamental shifts of investing from your traditional securities into what would be digital securities.
Great, thank you very much. Next question for Joao, if we could. One of the things that comes to the fore, and this question is really pointed at broadly stable coins and broadly the concept of the digitization of money. Joao, can you speak to a little bit to where and how you see that evolving? And one of the questions we often get is particularly focused on the unbanked and underbanked as well, and how that ties into the global market, the potential global market for stablecoins like USDC, for example.
Yes, I think it's a very, very important angle. As I said, we always have this dual concern when it comes to a protocol and to a standard like USDC. One is making sure that it can be almost like a platform or an infrastructure for businesses to build on top. You know, whether you are a marketplace, a commerce business, or just a financial service or application. You know, and thinking about USDC as an alternative to the traditional technology stack for money, and all of the benefits that you get from that in terms of you know, speed and cost of processing and reach in terms of the globe. The other angle to it is you know, the ability for consumers around the world to be bearers of you know, digital dollars, and what we have seen, particularly with the advent of the pandemic this year, is that there was a very, very strong demand, in particular from developing economies, and you know, and whether you like to call it like that, really unbanked kind of segments in societies, for folks to hold on to digital dollar assets. And that was a very clear trend. We could, because in blockchain you can actually see all of these funds flowing, and you can understand how they're being utilized. There was a lot of demand coming from South America, Southeast Asia, Africa, all of those places where you know, economies were tanking because of the difficulty with the health crisis, and maybe currencies were depreciating, maybe, you know, their economies were going through a turbulent time, and you could see a lot of these wallet products, you know, they're very vanilla, and you know, all that you need is a mobile phone to be able to access it. A lot of those driving demand on behalf of their consumers, to allow those consumers to hold on to digital dollars. I think this is a very interesting use case for us, and we work routinely with a number of companies that then, Circle is not directly involved in those sorts of applications and experiences, because we prefer to stand a little bit behind that user experience. But we're working with a lot of companies in all of those developing markets that are now thinking about this next generation of financial applications, whether they are, you know, transactional accounts or pseudo savings accounts, that can work in the form of these digital currencies, to give you know, this population that doesn't currently have access to a lot of these services, all of a sudden access to something that's significantly more sophisticated.
Well, thank you very much. We still have 2 or 3 more questions. I know we're running up on a stop, but we can go over a bit. Question for the panelists: should the U.S. have a digital dollar that is a stablecoin such as USDC? Or what is the collective panel's thoughts on the Federal Reserve potentially issuing a digital dollar of its own? And as we all know, they're at least doing that research that we suspect they were all doing. So for the panel and Barry, all of yourselves, interesting question.
Well, probably best to get your first views of that.
I can jump back in, and that is another topic that we are you know, collaborating closely with regulators around the world, is the interest from central banks and reserve banks, in terms of understanding how they can leverage this technology. I think it's still early stages, even though I think the conversation has accelerated tremendously, especially last year with Libra and the whole stablecoin option being brought to the forefront. I think in the US then in particular, again with the pandemic, the government has accelerated that research significantly. I think there's still space for us to figure out what the right model is, whether you know, a central bank getting involved and issuing a digital currency that actually is going to be held by a consumer, or whether that's going to be used more you know, in the financial system but not essentially reach consumers, and whether that model can interoperate with the private options that are out there. I think those are all possible models, and I think there's a lot of very smart people exploring all of those options right now.
Yeah, I can comment on this as well. The nearly every central bank is looking at this very closely. There's a variety already using stable coins, a number of POCs currently, and I think that's something that just won't be publicly seen. It's going to be very hidden how they're going to operate it, how it's going to run. They obviously see the value proposition centered around that process and what's available to them. It was a matter of simply getting comfortable and understanding the technology. Again, back to the educational component. But yeah, I wouldn't kid yourself. I would say every or near every central bank at this point is looking at this seriously, and we're working with a variety of them through that process.
You know, obviously, I have a little bit of an insider's take on this, but Steve, I was hoping perhaps you could take that comment from Andrew and give a little bit of a background on the work that we've been involved in with some of the CBDC projects, and specifically the Marshall Islands, which is a very publicly known use case that Algorand's been involved in.
Yeah, I guess I'll just to sort of summarize. I think others' points here. One, we've seen big increase in activity, kind of in the central bank digital currency arena. I think and I think if you look at the Marshall Islands, there's I think several other smaller countries that see that they could build an economic advantage by tokenizing their sovereign currency. We're also seeing bigger countries looking at it, and for sure, I think the aggressiveness that China has been expressing in bringing a digital currency forward in the market, I think is spurring others on. But I would say I also agree with what others said, which is it's early days, and I think there'll be different forms of issuance. Some of these tokens will be sort of central bank to central bank. Some of them will be retail. I think in some cases it will be issued as a stable coin in a more decentralized way. And so I think that right now there's probably a lot of different ways that people are thinking about these. And I think it aligns also with the new forms of assets, the new ways people are deploying securities. And I think all of these things ultimately will work together. So it'll be interesting to see how it shakes out. And not the least of which is that these different approaches have different technology requirements. And so if you just go back to some of the things Silvio said, our approach around co-chains is a way for people to handle regulatory requirements and privacy and others. And I think each of those different groups have slightly different needs that mean they're going to use the technology in a little bit different ways. So I think it's developing quickly, but definitely be interesting to see how things unfold.
Yeah, and I'll just quickly add that regardless of how you issue a stablecoin or any other type of a digital currency, one thing you definitely do not want is for that currency to be stolen from the smart contract itself, right? So you want to make sure that you're using a secure programming language and are very careful about how you deploy it.
Yeah. That's probably the perfect segue for Ron, for you to bring conclusion to today's webinar. I think it's been a spectacular and informative talk from my perspective. So thank you all for joining us. Ron, I'll pass it back over to you then.
Thank you so much, Barry, and thank you all our attendees, and specifically thank you very much to our panelists, all our friends at Algorand, Circle, Blockstack, and Republic. Anyone on the call who has additional questions, please feel free to email us, info@wsba.co, and we're happy to share with all our friends and colleagues. Thank you all again, and have a wonderful day.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.